Welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. Today I'm happy to have Meg Lindemulder of Curio Counselling and returning guest Nevena Kalajdzic. Both are here to chat with me about who therapy is right for and how do you know you could benefit from it. Just want to start off by thanking you both for being here today. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just want to jump right into why we're here, what we're talking about. And maybe before we do that, I can ask a little bit about both of you. Mm-hmm. Meg, I'd love to start with you, since it's your first timer on the show. So can you tell me a little bit about, I was asking you earlier, like you went to therapy school. So what'd you go learn and what kind of therapist are you?
Oh, great question. So I did my master in counseling with Nevena. Actually, we were classmates. That's how we met.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole program is really about learning different theories of counseling and different theories of mental health therapy and how different approaches and how to make sure that we can really make sure that we are helping people figure out what they want for their lives.
Is the world of therapy or becoming a therapist something that you knew you wanted to do as a kid?
No, not at all. No. I grew up in a really small town and I don't know if I even knew what therapy or counseling was growing up. It was not something that was ever really mentioned. I was thinking about this earlier and I don't even know if I even knew any therapists in my communities growing up. Like it just wasn't something that anybody ever really talked about.
Right.
And I actually went to school to be a teacher. I was a teacher for 10 years before I did this and wanted to change gears and have to thank my husband because he's the one who said, I think you should be a therapist because all your friends talk to you about all their issues.
And you therapize them.
I guess. It was kind of really an organic thing. It seemed to fit and so I went through the process of applying, got accepted, and thought, okay, I guess this is what I'm doing.
Were there differences between working in education and becoming a therapist? Do you see big differences there?
Yeah, huge differences.
So more differences than similarities?
I think so. I mean, what I really loved about being an educator was my relationship with the students and being able to, be more than just their English teacher in terms of like helping them understand about life. And I'm a big believer in reading fiction can really teach us to empathize and teach us about the world and about ourselves. And so that was the part that I really loved about being a teacher. And so in that sense, there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
I felt like going to therapy school, I love that term, going to therapy school, I felt like I was able to kind of get a better idea of how to help people recognize different patterns in their lives and just be able to understand themselves better.
Mm-hmm. And I really like how you said that. That's really what it's about, is recognizing patterns and reoccurring patterns and how do patterns even start.
Yeah.
We do all sorts of things throughout the day that we don't even recognize. And some we can tap into, and the ones that really keep creeping up or we keep having big, strong reactions to, right, are the ones that we probably should go talk to someone about. But we'll get to that in a second. So I have a couple more questions because I think it's so cool that you went from being a teacher, so you left teacher school and then went to therapy school. So in between, at what point was it a student? Was it an interaction? At what point did you decide that you were actually going to go jump ship and go do a whole different career?
I had children.
Oh, you had babies.
I had babies. And
you have 3 kids, too.
I have 3 kids, yeah. And so I kind of went back, took mat leave, then went back for a little while, took another mat leave, and then had surprise 3rd pregnancy and just decided that I was done. It was too much to try to do everything that being a teacher requires and be able to, effectively parent and be there for my 3 kids. Yeah. And so I was a stay-at-home mom for 4 years. And then during that time, I thought, this is not what I want to do with the rest of my life. Yeah. But I knew that I didn't want to go back to teaching. So then it was just sort of a process of self-exploration in terms of what do I want to do next and what fits me. And this is where I landed.
So what did you first learn about yourself? And I didn't go to therapy school. I went to counseling degree school, and all that self-reflection and all that journaling and all those papers that you write, learning about yourself, because in order to be the best therapist, I would imagine you really got to know yourself and be aware. So I would imagine there's things that you discovered in therapy school that maybe you wouldn't have when you were learning to be a teacher. So what were some of those things that you're like, holy crap, I should tap into this?
The biggest thing I learned about myself is that I have a very hard time taking constructive criticism.
Oh.
Because I take it really personally.
Interesting. And I think that's a teacher trait.
Probably. Yeah. And I mean, I know that came up as a teacher for sure, but I was a pretty good teacher, if I'm allowed to toot my own horn a little bit. But
of course,
I just remember the very first course we took. I don't know if you remember this, Nevena. And it was, they like threw us in there, man. We had to start like doing these sample therapy things with people right off the bat. And I froze.
Yeah.
I completely froze. And my professor was standing right there watching me. And I just completely froze. And it was like pretty intense moment for me because I was like, I can't do this.
Right.
I don't know what I'm doing. And I was really good at what I used to do. So why am I putting myself through this?
Yeah.
And then also during school, we had to do lots of recording ourselves, doing practice sessions. And then you have to go back over it and analyze what you did and what you would do differently next time. And, you know, having to constantly accept constructive criticism and find ways to make myself better. It was a huge learning curve and it was hard. Ultimately, I think, it makes me a better therapist and also a better person because now I can actually have somebody say, hey, maybe you could have done this a little differently and not take it so personally like, oh, they hate me or whatever.
Right. Or being a perfectionist a lot of times. You put all this pressure on yourself thinking you have to do everything right. And and I think if you're not already that way, definitely by a third kid, you definitely inherit that trait in terms of got to get it right and all these pressures that parents only from personal experience put on ourselves. Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Thanks, me
too. Thank you for thanks for letting me just like jump right into who are you and where are you from. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Is there anything else about you though that you want to share that maybe I haven't asked?
Like about myself as a therapist? Yeah. Oh, sure. I'm really a relational therapist, meaning that for me, most of the work is done in the relationship with the client.
Right.
It's really important to me that the client sees me as a good fit and that they feel safe and comfortable with me. I really think that the best work is done when you have a really strong working relationship between the therapist and the client. I also like to approach it as like, yes, I went to school for this and I kind of know what I'm doing, but you're the expert in your own life and you know yourself. And so I think what the client brings to the table is just as important as what I bring to the table. And that's really important to me to spend just as much, if not more time listening as helping a client or talking about teaching them things or helping them figure things out.
Right. Yeah, I think that's well said. I appreciate that. I think that's probably a misconception that people that are deciding about therapy have. I know I've talked to a few and I can see how it would make sense around, I'm going to go tell someone my life story and they're going to tell me what to do. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but that whole fix it mentality. So it's your job anyway to fix it, but now you're going to tell me all these things about it. And a lot of that has to do with, I think, our own interactions with loved ones and family members and how we all like to help each other and tell each other what to do, right? Whether it's your wife or your sister or your mother or whoever. And I also just listed all women, mothers, sisters, and wives. Isn't that interesting?
That is very interesting.
Wow. However, I think it's good to hear what you're saying, that this is a two-way street, right? So you as a therapist are only going to be able to take someone so far if they're not willing to show up and be part of that relationship. And you're not really there to know everything about them. As you're saying your client is the expert at all their stuff. And I think that's a really nice message. So,
yeah. And I think for me anyways, I'm not there to fix it, even though I'm definitely a fix it person.
Yeah.
I think we used to joke in school, like, we're all people who like to fix things, and yet therapy really isn't about fixing people.
Yeah, totally.
Because the client has to do the work.
Yeah.
And it's not up to me to, like you said, hand them a bunch of things to do and then your life is going to be better. It's not how it works. Right. And I think a lot of people do sort of have that, like, if I go to the doctor and I'm going to get medicine or, all these things that I need to get me better, or a mechanic and they're going to fix my car, but that's really not how therapy works. Yeah. It's a really collaborative process. Yeah. And I think it's a lot of work on both sides.
Right. Well, you could do a rebuttal then, because I had a comedian on recently, and he has a really funny little bit about comparing therapy to going to the mechanic. And how he lays it out really good. It's believable in some ways, and how he puts it out there. But sitting there, watching, and I agree with you, like that's not the case. But the whole bit is about, at the end of the day, the mechanic tells you all the ways that your car is messed up, but then also says, just take your car home and, we'll fix it as we go, kind of thing, right? And or it's all on you to fix. And I totally butchered Jeevan Gill's whole bit. And this is why I'm not a stand-up comedian, but it's a funny one. So I think it's funny that even your comparison to that and saying, well, that's not actually how it works. It's a relationship. And the more trustful this relationship is, the more genuine this relationship is, real this relationship is, the better we can, get to the other side of whatever it is a client's hoping for. Anyways, appreciate you're here. I know I didn't want to ignore you, Nev. I know you're in the room too. So I want to welcome you as well. Thank you for being our returning guest. So it's always nice when you folks come back a second round. So that validates me on so many levels. But I am really happy that you're here. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm always happy to come back and chat more about all the psych things. I love this kind of conversation.
That. You do.
Yeah.
Also, you were on in December an episode just about how to prepare for the holidays, pre and post. You got a lot of good feedback. I just want you to know we put that episode out really quickly. So you were quick at helping me get the information and get it out there. And folks really appreciated it. In particular, the post-holiday talk, because I think we're starting to recognize there's ways that we can prepare, whether in-laws are coming or we're traveling or we don't have the money to spend. But sometimes we forget about what happens afterwards. And so I think it was good to have you come talk a little bit about how do you prepare, as well as prepare for after the holidays and what happens going into the new year. So thank you for coming on. Got really good feedback from a lot of folks. And, I just want to, in particular, want to put out a point. My father, and I think I've told you this, my father, I always now talk about this in like outside of here, but he heard that episode and he heard another episode and he said to my mom, I feel like an alien in our own country, in our own world, because I'm learning all these things. And so he and my mom talk a lot about, they listen to these episodes and, find ways to move forward. And I think it's so lovely that having a psychologist like you on that can speak in a way that folks can say, oh my gosh, this alien feeling I have is less and less. Like this information you're bringing to me actually feels like I can understand it. It's making sense. And so they were really appreciative of that. And so I know today's going to be really helpful as well. So thank you.
Yeah, I hope so. That's great. I appreciate the feedback and I'm glad people found some value in it. I think it's things that we don't often consider. It's nice when we can learn about it and realize that can be like those can be different factors that play in our day-to-day, but also I think just prompting conversations. I think people being able to reach out to others and speak more openly about some of the challenges they're experiencing. Like you said, especially post-holiday season. That's great. I'm glad it was helpful.
So help us understand, because last time when you were on, we were like in business mode and just getting through the episode. We didn't really get to talk a lot about you and who you are. So I'd love for you to share with folks what brought you to therapy school. It sounds like you guys went to the same therapy school. So why therapy?
I'm going to also say I love that you're calling it therapy school. I think
when I had a doctor on, I called it doctor school.
Oh, that's so great. Yeah, I knew for a long time, I think, that I wanted to be in a helping profession, is what I would say. Probably as early as like grade 3 and 4. I think in grade 4 back home in Slovenia. I'm not from Canada, so I immigrated here, but I grew up in Slovenia. And even I think in grade 4, I remember this first project I did, which was on a phone crisis line for children.
Oh.
And I collaborated with a couple of my classmates to put a presentation on how to access help. Oh. And from there, I think my interest in mental health and addictions and different relationship challenges, it kind of grew over time. And at that point, I was already living in Canada. Yeah, and in grade 10 or 11, I was in my first psychology class, and that was really great to be able to learn more about the different ways that our brains work, that people work. That's always fascinated me a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think that's prompted a lot of my interest in doing this work is actually, I love people and I love learning about people and I love helping people.
Yeah.
So all of those things combined have kind of led me to where I am today.
Oh, nice. So you grew up in Slovenia, and just like Meg was saying, in her small town where she grew up, the whole talk about therapy wasn't really a thing. So for you, what were you surrounded around? Like, was that part of your culture? Like, how did you know that there's this kids help phone line? Where did you get that idea from?
Yeah, we actually had that information at our school, which you would think maybe at that time, because this is some time ago, that wouldn't be as accessible. But I think there was already, more and more conversations starting to happen around mental health and where to get help. But that's not to say that it was still limited in terms of accessibility or the fact that people didn't know. Like, I think the conversation today is tackling some of those things where people don't know, when do I go? Why do I go? Where do I go? All of those things. And that was an issue then. And I think it continues to be in a lot of ways an issue today for many. So yeah, it was cool to actually have exposure to that. But in terms of like my own family, for example, we never really talked about therapy or therapists as something that, it's not something it would come up, but we would talk about our feelings and how do you manage those and different things like that. And so I guess I have my parents to thank for being supportive in that sense and doing their job as parents to teach me about some of those things to the extent that they knew.
Did you find because you said you immigrated to Canada, did you and your family find differences in how mental health was viewed at the time that you had come out to Canada from being in Slovenia?
Yeah, I think so, in the sense that I guess they still hadn't had too much exposure to different kind of like mental health concerns. And I think here there's been more and more talk about different kinds of mental health disorders that people talk about, which is kind of like a medical focus or a medical way to think about it. And so it, I think, started coming up more and more in this culture, in North American culture, in, talking about depression and anxiety and bipolar disorder and all these kinds of different things that people experience. I think for us back home, it was, you would maybe talk about some of those feelings of sadness or feelings of anxiety, but people would know about things like schizophrenia or something that makes you really seriously ill. And that's kind of thought of as mental health issues. Yeah. I think the context was around those really severe cases and people who really struggle with their mental health, as opposed to some things that are just kind of like day to day. Like we all have mental health challenges and go through our own ups and downs. And I think it's likely that it was more of a conversation, I guess, and more, I can't speak for my parents, but I think it became more of a thing that they were aware of once we were living here. But they've always, been willing to also look for help and look at, how can we get support. Yeah. They always cared about that support. And I think that brings me back to, and I love that you mentioned the village earlier today too. It's like, I always think about the concept of village and the fact that we need connections. And so maybe for my parents, when they were thinking about mental health and support, they weren't so much thinking of like, oh, let's send my kid to therapy, but let's make sure that we're connected to our family, to our friends, to community supports, and have our own circle of people who you can lean on when you need help.
Right. I like that you say that. And I think for me as well, therapy wasn't necessarily always on the table growing up. I too had quite a village around me. And I think, I share a lot of my own experiences with trauma and my childhood. And I'm very appreciative that my parents are very in support in me sharing my story. And we grow, we move forward, and we all learn the things that maybe we didn't know years ago. And so, but in talking about a lot of that, I think a lot of my resiliency came from the fact that I had that village. I had aunts and uncles and grandparents and people that loved. However, I also felt that sometimes that village, we don't want to disappoint them. So even though we have love and support and we have community recreational activities and things, we like the feeling of being included, but we don't always talk about the things that are really going on under the surface. And so I know that if I brought something up to a relative, they'd figure something out, but it didn't always seem like it was an option for any of us. Like we just how's school? How are you doing? Are you happy? You look happy. I love you. And I like that you did this. Like lots of lovely things, but we never really talked about that bad thing, that scary thing that happened. And so I feel like part of the show is, can we have, our village 2.0? Like, can we look at putting other things and other tools that can help our village? And maybe not necessarily always having to feel like, well, because I can't talk to my brother or my friend over here, that there are other alternatives. And that's part of why you guys are here today is, okay, is there a way that we can talk about some of these things? So I wanted to know a little bit about Curio, your practice. And both of you work out of this practice. I had the opportunity of getting a tour, went to your building downtown Calgary. Beautiful building, beautiful office, very inviting. But tell us a little bit about this practice. Who do you serve?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for saying that it's inviting. That's very important to us. One of the things that kind of prompted me to start this practice was just a way to make accessing therapy a little less scary. Yeah. And part of that, I think, is being able to find it easily, whether that's when you're first looking online or when you're showing up. But part of that is just walking into a space that feels welcoming, that feels safe and comfortable. So thank you for that. Yeah. I appreciate that. We generally serve quite a broad group of people, actually. So we offer counseling for children, for teens and youth, for adults, individual type counseling. We also do relationship counseling and family therapy. Nev's specialty is family therapy. I'll let her talk more about that later. We are also in the process of developing some group therapy.
Oh.
Yeah. So
how does that work?
It's actually a really cool concept where you can get a group of people that are all going through some of the same things. So for example, there's some like suicide bereavement groups. So maybe it's a group of people who've all lost somebody to suicide. And there's like support groups on Facebook, and you can have those kinds of different conversations with people who've had similar experiences. But in actual group therapy, there's an actual therapeutic process that gets through, that people can share what they've been through, but also be able to support people who have been through something similar. And you have one or two therapists in the room with the group that are helping everyone process what's happening. And there's really not as much access to group therapy in Calgary as I think people could benefit from. And so that's one of the goals behind us developing a group program. Is the reason it becomes more accessible is it's cheaper. You pay less per session and you get that extra support. So like Nev was talking earlier about, having a village. If you don't have a village of people who have experienced similar things to you or are going through the same thing, then maybe this group can become a kind of village for you.
Well, and I'm just imagining one-on-one training session versus group training session. I loved one-on-one training, but it's very intense and it's all about me, and I can't really cheat when I'm working out because they're paying attention. But I have a group of people that I get to work out with, and we're helping each other. And then you start to feel like, I don't want to miss it because so-and-so is going to be there and I want to be there for them. And so you just naturally develop this group of people, and before you realize, you're now going to every HIT class, right? Because you have this community. So that sort of am I connecting that? Like that makes sense, or maybe I'm missing something?
No, I think you're connecting that. I think that's a good analogy. Group therapy tends to be kind of like for a set amount of time, 6, 8, 10 weeks, depending on what it is and the therapist and how they want to structure the class. It is that same kind of thing where, ideally you want to go and you benefit, but you're also helping other people benefit as well.
I think that helps fuel your own bucket when you're receiving that help. But the fact that you get to give that, I think that we all want to jump to help people before we want to help ourselves. So it's nice to be able to have a little bit of both in there. I'm imagining that would support the whole process of grieving or whatever it is that folks are going to that. So these groups are starting soon?
Yeah, we're hoping to have them up and running by May.
Oh, awesome.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, great. No, that's awesome. And anything else you guys offer before we check in? Because you mentioned Nev will talk about family therapy.
Yeah. Oh, we also offer play therapy.
Okay.
For younger children. We have a play therapist on staff, and for people who don't know what that is, it's therapy that utilizes play to help, especially kids, but it can be even teens and hey, sometimes I think we even do playful things with adults in session as well, but just kind of a way of bypassing some of the really hard traumatic stuff, but still being able to process it. And so our play therapist works with children as young as 4. She's got lots of experience and she's really great. So I don't want to speak too much for her, but she definitely is someone who we're super pumped to have on staff, and I think will be a really great asset for that group of, ages 4 to 17 kind of thing.
Right. Can I ask why would a 4-year-old need therapy?
It's a really good question. It can be something like as simple as, maybe it's not really simple, but just helping with like emotional regulation. Right. So maybe they don't know how to express their emotions very well, or even just manage their emotions. It could be kids who are dealing with some things like ADHD, or maybe they have been diagnosed with some kind of learning disability, any of those kinds of things. Yeah. And then, of course, there's some of the more serious things, such as maybe their parents are going through a divorce, maybe they've lost a parent, possibly they've experienced some really bad trauma, even abuse. There's lots of different things that, children as young as 4 can benefit from therapy.
And just because I think this is a little bit of a unique conversation, mostly because I haven't tapped into play therapy yet, but also I think for a lot of the listeners and folks that I talk to, figuring out what's the best age to go to therapy, and I'm sure you guys are going to cover some of that in a bit, but when you start as young as 4, some people think, well, children that young don't have the capacity to really talk or communicate back how they're feeling. So how would a 4-year-old be able to tell a therapist that feeling right now? Like how would a kid be able to tell a therapist that?
Yeah. So again, this isn't my area of expertise. That's a lot of where the play comes in. Most play therapists will have a room full of different toys and different things that kids can access. Yeah. And I'll just give you one example. You could have say a whole bunch of different figurines, different people, animals, whatever, and you can have kids kind of pick out ones that they identify with a member of their family. So maybe they would choose, a tiger for their mom because their mom takes care of them, and they've seen their mom protect them, or something along those lines. Yeah. A well-trained play therapist will be able to kind of help a child make those connections and also be able to kind of interpret what the child is communicating through those kinds of things.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And the distinction here too is around the fact that we're talking talk therapy kind of separate from play therapy. So we're not expecting a 4-year-old to engage in talk therapy, which is maybe more of what Meg and I would do. Whereas somebody who actually practices in play therapy will often use those other ways that don't require so much talking. And there's also other therapeutic ways of working with people that don't require talking. Yeah. Also for adults. I know you've had Jennifer Hoy here talking about EMDR as another approach that's a little bit different, that doesn't require as much talk therapy, that involvement. So I think it's just different ways that we work with people that really anybody at any age could engage in therapy, finding the right, if you can find the right way.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what we're going to talk about in a little bit here is what is the right way. Awesome. Okay, so Nev, I was going to ask you to tap into family therapy. That's your niche. That's what you're doing over there.
Yeah, so I actually work with individuals and families as well as couples, but I think family is my favorite thing to do, I would say. So I may be biased a bit that way. I'm just most passionate about family therapy and relationship therapy because I often look at people and consider what's going on within them, but also what's going on between people.
Right.
So it's that within and between perspective that I try to hold, because I believe that our connections with others ultimately do affect us in helpful ways and unhelpful ways, in healthy and unhealthy ways. Right. And so I think doing relationship work and family therapy can really benefit a lot of people in learning about themselves, the way they interact with others and the way they interact with the world, the way that they make sense of the world also. Yeah. So it's a really cool process to engage in it that's different than individual therapy, because when you get multiple people in a room together to talk about some of the difficulties or things that they really appreciate and value about each other, it can be a really powerful and meaningful thing.
Yeah, no, I would imagine having my own family, I think we have boys that are getting older. And so my husband and I are figuring out if our older son would like to go talk to someone else, or does he feel like he's getting what he needs from his village, his uncle, his parents, his grandparents, all that. And, you know, my husband and I were talking about preparing for the fact that, and I only know this because I work in mental health, and maybe others that don't work in mental health understand this too, but sometimes we think one member of our family can use that help and support. However, I feel we all are part of that ripple effect. And so I think you've talked about this in the past too. Like you think it's really important to have the whole family unit if there's a young person in the household that's struggling. Can you talk a little bit about how that could be beneficial in helping? Like if Carrie and I, maybe even our other son, join our son, should we engage in therapy in the near future?
Yeah.
How would it benefit all of us going versus my son, who sounds like it really is the one that's struggling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's often the perspective that parents come in with too, because we really want to help your child, and you're like, well, here's my child, and can you please help them with what they're struggling with?
Yeah.
The thing is, oftentimes, again, some of those struggles exist in the context of the relationship. Like, for example, when we're working with teens, you can think about, you know, the adolescent being such a complex period and how often parents get in conflict with their teen children. And so it's one of those things where it's like, let's figure out, how do we work together? How do we support each other? What do you need? How do I respond to you in the way that you need from that parent perspective? And so it's not that, you know, children coming into therapy means that something's completely wrong with the parents and you've messed your kid up and now it's your job to fix it.
Right.
It's not that either.
Even though you might feel like that all the time.
Sometimes it does, right? But it's not that. It's about the fact that we don't live in isolation from each other. We can't take an individual, like one person, out of their context and treat them individually as if nothing else is happening around them. Yeah. So if you brought your kiddo into counseling, he might be able to talk about different things that are happening for him at home, at school, with friends. But at the same time, there might be things where bringing in parents will actually be helpful in helping, let's say for you to understand him better, to understand where he's coming from or where he's getting stuck, or how maybe some of the things that you're doing aren't actually the most helpful way to respond.
Right.
Maybe he needs something different.
Yeah.
And that again is another piece where, you know, I believe that each child needs unique kind of parenting approach. And so kids aren't all, just like we all aren't the same. There aren't any, you know, two people that can be treated the exact same way, they want to be treated the same way, that need the same kind of support, that have the same kind of challenges. It varies. And so it's about learning about each other and how do we work together as a family unit. So I think, yes, anytime a child is coming into therapy, it can be both important, but it can be really beneficial for parents and the rest of the family to be involved in that process.
Yeah.
And there can be a wide variety of reasons for, you know, how that can be helpful.
Right.
And I think it can be really healing and validating for parents to come in to realize, yeah, you didn't mess up your kid.
Yeah.
You just haven't learned yet about how to or when to or what to do in certain situations. Yeah. Because parenting, like other things, requires a skill set and us learning how to do that. Like, I think because so many people become parents, sometimes you're not necessarily prepared or haven't had the best experiences yourself in being parented. Yeah. And so that all carries over. So it's really like, okay, let's figure out, you know, what can I do as a parent? What can I learn that's new? What do I want to do different that, you know, compared to my own parents?
Right. Yeah.
All those things. Like there's so much there. And so I think family therapy is just a really neat way to approach some of those things in a group environment and not really placing blame anywhere. Yeah. You can identify those problems. The problems aren't in the people. The problems are often in the patterns and the way that we interact with each other. Yeah. And so that's what we're working on in family therapy.
I love it. I have so many more questions about that, but I'm going to pause them. Otherwise, we're just going to make this about one tiny thing.
We could do a whole episode on just that.
Exactly. That's what every therapist that comes on says. We could do a 6-part series is what I say back. So is anything else about Curio that you'd like to share before I ask you to give us where we can, if people are interested, where they can look you up and all that?
Well, I really like what Nev was just talking about, because one of my goals in starting this practice was to be really collaborative on every level. And that includes like between therapist and client, like I was saying earlier, but also within family units, that we can support a whole family, whether it's through family therapy or doing individual therapy for different family members or both.
Right.
And then also being collaborative among us as therapists, and that we're able to support each other, not just in terms of, emotional support and all the other things that we need as human beings, but also in terms of professional support. And that's like kind of the backbone of, for me, the vision that I had and what I'm hoping we're building is this really collaborative environment. Yeah. And even extending beyond that into our community and being able to work with maybe different counseling agencies or different organizations within Calgary to support people in the best way possible.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was just reading today, somebody had posted something about, how to shop. I'm going to just say it my way, but like how to shop for a therapist. And when you go to the therapist store, and you just said it so well. And one of the things that they had said on there was you're looking for therapists or for practices that are collaborative. Because if you're going to one person and that one person doesn't have their network of people to consult with and grow with and get better, because therapy is ever growing, ever changing, even as the human behind the therapy, you're ever growing and changing. So if you don't have those resources and you're not doing that reading and upgrading, then it would be probably difficult for your clients, or your clients aren't going to get the experience that they could be getting. So I love that you brought that up. And so to me, for people that are going to the therapy store to go shop, that's one good thing to look for, which is what you just said. And are these practices you're going to, people you're going to, who are they collaborating with? Who are they growing with? So well said. So I want to just really quickly ask you both about middle fingers. I hope you brought something to put your middle fingers up to. Yeah. So maybe Nev, I'll start. Oh, actually, you know what, Meg? I'm going to start with you because you're my guest. So you get to go first.
Because you're returning.
Yeah. Returning guest,
that's how I treat my returning today.
You are.
You got the broken mic in the corner there.
I was treatment is this?
Yeah, right.
I was going to put my middle finger up to something serious, but I think I'm just going to lighten things up a little. I want to put my middle finger up to 2-week spring breaks for my kids.
Said the former teacher.
Right.
When I was a teacher, it was wonderful. Don't get me wrong. No, and I mean, if I could take time off and we could go somewhere, that 2 weeks is an amazing time that can be really great for family bonding and all that kind of stuff. But, as two working parents trying to manage all of that for 2 weeks instead of just one. Yeah, it's been a bit of a struggle.
I would imagine those camps are not cheap.
No.
Yeah.
They're ridiculous.
They really are.
And then they want to go to summer camp too, and it's just, you can't do it all.
Yeah. Yeah. But then the reality for some families is that they need it.
Yeah.
But then how do you afford it? Because it's so expensive, right? It's not even like I want my children to thrive at this camp. It's like, for me, it's like I have no choice. Like, who's going to take care of you?
Exactly.
Well, that's how it was, I guess. But I didn't realize it was 2 weeks long. I should go check our calendar because I thought ours was only 1 week.
It probably is. My kids are in a different school, different school system. So,
got all the various
that's a good
school calendars.
Yes.
Yeah. So, are they coming to work? Bring your family to work.
They're going to get lots of screen time. They're going to love it.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say they're going to get a lot of therapeutic time, but I love
they're going to go hide in one of the offices with their screen so that I can do my job.
Yeah, it's so sad, but it works.
It does.
Because they will be preoccupied unless if they're hungry, but you throw a bag of fishy crackers in there and it's golden.
They're good to go.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Charge cords, fishy crackers, and... Yeah, what else do they really need?
Maybe something to drink.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Water them.
Some water. Yeah. Or juice boxes or whatever, right? They need, Oh my gosh. Good luck with that one.
Thank you.
What about for you, Nev?
Well, you know what? I had a silly one last time, but I was thinking as we were kind of prepping for this episode, mental health has come such a long way, and accessing mental health has come such a long way over the years. Yeah. But the mental health stigma is still ever present in so many different ways, and maybe in some new ways too, actually. Because I was thinking about, we have all these new, the new generation, the younger generations that are making therapy quite trendy in some ways. It's really become, I think, important. People are realizing that it's important that we are self-aware, that we tune into, what we feel, how we think, what we think, all that kind of stuff. But the mental health stigma around accessing help and actually going to therapy is still very strong, I think. Yeah. I think that people get stuck thinking, even if they understand mental health and knowing that therapy can be a resource for them, I think they get stuck thinking, well, it's not for me, it's for my friends or for my parent or for somebody else, but it may be.
I love that for you, but not for me.
Exactly, right? Yeah. And it's like, okay, but you understand, some of the basics around mental health. So if you knowing that, why do you think that wouldn't be a good fit for you? At what point do you think that it would be appropriate? And when I think about that, oftentimes and in talking to others about it too, oftentimes what I hear is the continued messages around therapy or getting help for your mental health means that you're weak or means that you're unstable or means that something's wrong with you, you're messed up in some way. There's still a lot of those messages still exist in our society. So even though we've come a long way in being able to talk about, I have depression, anxiety, or this or that, or I struggle in this way, even though it's more appropriate to talk about it and it's more accepted that way, in the same breath, I want to say but it's not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. So my middle finger up is to mental health stigma that continues to be there. And a part of our talking today, I think, is we're continuing to try to deconstruct it, which is the point of part of what we do, I guess.
Yeah. I think so. You guys are up against, as therapists, a big battle, if you will. I know as therapists, you're going to turn it into being curious, which is the name of your...
It is.
Yeah. Is that why you thought of Curio?
Yeah, it is actually. It's because I've sort of come to recognize therapy as a process of curiosity, both the therapist being curious about the client and the client being curious about themselves. Yeah. And if we can be, compassionately curious about our own selves and our own lives, it's amazing what we can discover.
Do you think that being compassionately curious will help break the stigma in the way that Nev's talking about? Do you think that could be helpful?
I think it absolutely could be. We were chatting before the show just about that idea of self-stigma too.
Yeah.
And how we sort of think maybe I'm weak for needing this, or maybe we take that step and we're in therapy, but we're second guessing everything we're saying and wondering what the therapist is thinking about us. I had therapy this morning myself because therapists go to therapy. Yeah. But, I have to deal with some of my own stuff when I'm sitting in the client chair as opposed to the therapist chair in terms of being what is the therapist thinking about me? And instead of kind of recognizing that this is about me being curious about myself, about some of the patterns in my life, some of the thought processes that I've been stuck in. And if I can approach my own therapy with an attitude of curiosity, and if I can approach therapy as a therapist from an attitude of curiosity, I really feel like there's just so much to learn.
But how do we get curious? Because your point is so valid, Nev, in what you're saying about stigma. And I do like how thoughtful you are in the name and where the origin of your practice is coming from, because I agree with you. I think they go hand in hand. Anytime we're curious about something, we're breaking an assumption about something. And that's really what stigma is, right? Would you say it's an assumption about mental health, or how would you two define stigma?
I would say it's, in this context, mental health stigma, I think it is making assumptions and holding beliefs about what it means to be in therapy or to be struggling with mental health or to be, again, to have depression or to have anxiety. Stigma, I think, is rooted in those misconceptions around the beliefs and kind of ideas that we hold around these things. And the messaging in society around that has been quite clear in a lot of ways. We see things in movies and in music around what it means to be, not doing well with your mental health.
Quote unquote crazy.
Right, quote unquote crazy, yeah. So we get a lot of those messages from our environment, from our community, from our context. So I think that's where stigma comes from. So I know I didn't necessarily define stigma there, but to me, it's what we make it to be, how we understand it. So if somebody can look at therapy and think, oh, therapy is a great way for me to get help when I'm struggling with my mental health, and it means that I'm being kind to myself and caring for myself and being intentional about what I want my life to look like, you could look at it that way. Somebody else will say, well, I need therapy, but that means that I'm weak, that I'm, whatever, right? Fill in the blank of all the negative connotation that it can carry. So it's about the meaning that we make out of it. And I think stigma is all of those negative meanings that we hold, that our society has told us about therapy and mental health.
So what would you two say is then because you mentioned self-stigma. So would is there a bit of a difference there, or would you define that?
I think just to add on to what Nev was saying, to kind of define stigma, for me, a lot of it is judgment. There's judgment attached to stigmas. We judge other people, judge ourselves. And I see kind of curiosity as the antidote to judgment. It's a way of, instead of looking at somebody and judging them for what they think, it's like, well, why do you think what you think? Or tell me more, or give me an idea of why you believe this, or why you've chosen to make this decision.
Yeah, well, I think what you're both saying is there is no easy definition. I think what you both have said is very accurate in how I would see it, and also I think when you talk to others. But I think we surface talk stigma, right? Like if I'm struggling, then I'm sharing it on social media. It's showing my vulnerability, and I'm being really brave, and I'm being curious about me and all sorts of things. However, there's folks that will write on there, let's say if I put a post out about I'm having a low day, people will send me hearts and say, hang in there, buttercup, whatever, sunshine, you're great, we love you. But a lot of those people will also be like, I love that for you, as we said a few minutes ago, but like not for me. Like I don't need that. I think there's like this two-sided coin in that I don't have any stigma. Like I don't have anything against mental health when it's for someone outside of me, and preferably outside of my household. But when it comes to my household and me, then I'm going to hold my cards closer. I'm not going to share with my village and all the community, all the great people that I thought I had for support. And so I would agree in that we have a long ways to go, and it's not as easy to answer.
And sometimes we hold a double standard. I think that's what you were mentioning, is that we actually hold a double standard when we do have some tolerance for mental health, understanding of mental health, and accept therapy as a way to use help.
Yeah.
We sometimes hold a double standard, like you said, that's fine for you, but it's not for me. And then we have to look at, why is it fine for you and not for me?
Yeah.
Why is it okay for that other person? And you're not necessarily feeling like you're judging them. Maybe you're like really accepting and excited for them that they're going and getting help about a serious issue that they're having. And you're saying, yeah, that's awesome. I'm so glad. I'm so happy for that person. It's so cool or brave, like you said, that they're doing that. But if I were to go, then it means something different. So again, it's that self-stigma. Maybe we are then assigning a different kind of meaning to ourselves. If I were to go to therapy, it means this. But if you were to go to therapy, it means something different.
Right.
And that's why are we holding that double standard? Yeah. If therapy is known as something that can be a helpful tool for people, then why are we questioning why it suddenly becomes not helpful to us or not for us?
Well, and that's the premise behind this passion project. As I mentioned, therapy wasn't really a thing growing up. Eventually, I think my mom in particular did reach out, did get some counseling. We kind of in our own way started to become educated in this world. And this was before I went to school. But I remember when I talked about my village, like I had all that love and support, and I just knew something was missing because I had experienced some sad things and I didn't know how to make sense of them. And I don't know why exactly, but I decided to go see, and I'd mentioned this in a different episode, went to go see my guidance counselor. And I always love his name was Mr. Payne. And I was 14 years old. But I knew I needed to go see someone. And I just still remember the feeling when I left his closet of an office. And it literally was this tiny little closet with a sheet. That's a respect the guidance counselor had in high school. I don't know if they've upgraded to a door now.
Do you think that reflects the importance of mental health?
100%. 100%. And most of his job was to help with academic counseling, right? You should drop this course and take that. So I think he was so happy that he could use his skills when I showed up and was, the hot mess that I was at 14. To go back to what you're saying, why do we separate it? I think in that moment I learned why we're so afraid of counseling. The minute I left his office, I will never forget that the first time in my life, I had a very different feeling of what validation was. Mm-hmm. And I am not saying that I didn't get that growing up. I got that a lot growing up. Family, teachers, loved ones, friends, parents. Like I had a lot of validation growing up. But I realized, and I still go back to that day and think about, I think we think validation means agreeing. So when you, Nevena, when I tell you a pain I'm having, you know, I had a fight with my child, and when you say, oh yeah, your child is whatever, then I'm being validated. But you don't have to agree with what's happening with me and my kid. You can validate my feelings. And I think that is the best way to not feel crazy. So all these things we think about stigma and mental health is crazy. It's like, actually, for me, it was a gift. Going and talking to someone and sitting with them and them saying, no, dear, you're not crazy. I'm so glad you came, and let's help you get to the bottom of this really serious issue that you came here for. And I don't think as loved ones we don't validate each other, but I don't know if I could give my husband that kind of validation had he had some kind of issue or concern or something that he could address with a therapist, right? I can only provide first aid in the house to a point before you got to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
I think validation is the thing that we want to knock down stigma. We got to talk more about what does that feel like? What does that mean when you get that? Because then we are crazy if we're not seeking therapy.
Do you think everybody knows what validation is?
I don't. Like, that's a good point. Yeah.
So let me ask you really quickly.
Oh, tables are going to turn now.
I know. Just gonna snag in this for a second. But what I want to know is you described feeling validated. And so what did that feel like for you? If you were to describe it with other words, explaining what that validation
Such a good
was,
question.
What was it?
Thank you for that question.
You're welcome.
Validation in that moment to me was sitting down and somebody being at my energy level in the room. And by that meaning eye contact, responding to me when I was talking, created a space where I was not afraid to share a very dirty, dark secret. And I was so afraid of this dirty, dark secret because I couldn't share it with all my loved ones that I had support from. So this person was in a room with me and I didn't feel I had to protect them. I realized I was protecting my loved ones because I didn't think they could handle what I had to share. But this man, this counselor, had his shit together, at least I thought he did. And he could take what I said and hold on to it as I talked about it. To me, he probably said, you're not crazy and all these sorts of things. But it was the feeling when I walked out, like I just felt like I lost 100 pounds. Like I left this weight, this thing that I felt like I had to deal with on my own. I was 14 years old and he took it from me and he said we were going to figure it out. And it was going from being so scared to just, his words were like a warm hug. And I don't think I would have, and again, I love my family and my friends and all that. I would never have gotten that because I would have only told him a bit of the story or whatever. But this man was so strong that I could tell him everything that I was feeling. I don't know if I described it to you in that way, but that to me,
that's beautiful. What a beautiful, validation. Amazing way to feel. Yeah,
I would write my book. Let's go write that chapter book we've been talking about. I think about that being, sometimes we in our therapy world will talk about being containers essentially, and in a sense, as you described that, I was thinking of that guidance counselor was being a container for you to share and kind of dump, if you will, all of your heavy-ness that you were holding on to, because secrets are very heavy. Oh gosh, aren't they ever?
Things that we can't share with others, or we really want to or need to get off our chest. When we don't have that space, it stays inside. And inside, it's kind of like poison. It just sits and festers, and if you don't know where to put it or what to do with it, it will likely grow. And it will likely get more difficult to manage. And so when we go through hard things, it's helpful to have a container, to have a space where you feel like you can come and dump some of that. Not only does it share the weight, like you said, you felt like you lost 100 pounds. It is a huge relief to be able to speak out loud some of the things that we hold on to. And that in itself can be therapeutic. And then in therapy, you also take it beyond that to actually look at healing or different ways of what you need to do to actually move on or be able to live with what's happened in a different way. But I think that idea of container came up for me. The image came up.
Yeah, it's really well. I'm picturing this big white container storage box. Like I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly it. And it's there. And kudos to therapists like yourselves that have the capacity and ability to be that container for so many people every day. I'd asked Jennifer Hoy this too. I'm like, how do you guys keep it in a container as therapists? Because like you even said, Meg, you went to your own session today. So you have your own stuff. You're human. Like you're not that robot, right? You're human. So how do you guys do that?
I'll be totally honest, it's hard. Yeah. And it's an ongoing process. I think there's a learning curve to it, to being able to leave your work at work, I guess, in terms of not taking those stories with you and carrying them home to your family and to your relationships. We took some training in how to do that. We have our own therapist. We have each other for the kind of collaborative consulting stuff that we talked about earlier. But it is difficult. I think it's fair to say that there's a learning curve for us too in terms of being able to hold all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But I consider it an honor to be able to learn how to do that because, like Nev was saying, and you were saying, like people need that. Mm-hmm. And I just want to add, I really love that we can talk about therapy as that kind of process as opposed to, I can't get my shit together, so I have to go see somebody. Yeah. Because maybe that can help break some of that stigma in terms of it's just somebody else to help hold stuff with you. Yeah. And it's just a safe space to be you and to figure out how you're going to handle all of this stuff.
Right. I also want to just point, like, I know we jumped into stigma and it was after your MFU and I didn't go back and say this, but I was going to give up my MFU to join with you about the MFU to the stigma of mental health. So I just thought I'd go back and say that in case either of you were really worried about why I didn't see my middle fingers up. But,
yeah, you need the middle fingers up too.
Sometimes I give mine up, but I like this. I'm going to keep putting my middle fingers up to this and keep asking you guys more questions about stigma. And I really appreciate this conversation because it's really nice to have therapists like yourselves on that are willing to talk about your own sort of worries and where you're coming from and not just bouncing back answers. I appreciate that you're right where a lot of us probably are. Some are on the cusp of wanting to get therapy. Some have gone and have not had good experiences. Yeah. And so I think that also adds to stigma as well. I tried it, but it wasn't for me. What would you say to that? Have you experienced that yourself? Have you had clients come to you and say,
So I think part of this comes back to that relationship between the client and the therapist that we were talking about earlier. I like to say to my clients when I first meet them, I'll say, just like you're not going to be friends with everybody, I might not be the right therapist for you. Mm-hmm. Like, I hope I am. I hope I can support you, but I might not be a good fit for you. And I always tell them, you can't hurt my feelings if you fire me or don't come back. But it's really important to me that you feel safe, comfortable, heard, and that I feel like a good fit. Right. Sometimes it's hard to describe what that is. It's just a feeling. But I think it's really, if you've tried therapy and it didn't work for you, probably doesn't mean that therapy isn't for you. It just might mean that therapist or that particular type of therapy wasn't for you.
Yeah, because you had mentioned earlier, like, it's so relational. Mm-hmm. So like you said, we're not always going to get along with everyone, and it's okay. I'm not hurting your feelings if I come to a session with you and then never show up again, or if I have the courtesy, I might call and say, you're not for me, but you're not offended by that is what I'm hearing.
No, not at all. And I also just want to acknowledge that, like, I can't help everybody with every problem. We choose to specialize in certain areas, right? And we take extra training in certain areas, things that we're passionate about or things that we are really strongly about. Yeah. I'm not going to be able to help everybody with everything. If someone comes to me with an issue that I don't have training in, first of all, it would be unethical for me to try to help them because I don't know what I'm doing in that instance. But also, I know that they would probably get better support somewhere else. So then I'm going to say, hey, why don't you try this? Whether it's another therapist within our practice or another practice altogether. Right. I was thinking too about how you know, you can go to therapy for like anxiety, for example, and maybe doing a more like cognitive, brain-based kind of therapy is better for you if you have anxiety. But if you have trauma, that probably isn't going to be the best type of therapy for you. So it really also depends on why you're going to therapy, who you're going to end up fitting with.
Right.
Because it's also very possible that you go to a therapist with a specific issue and you're like, oh, it didn't work for me. But maybe that therapist just wasn't either trained to deal with that or used an approach that doesn't work for you.
Okay. Like, I'm just thinking about, and part of why we decided to have this conversation, right, is because it's like, this is overwhelming. I know where the doctor is. I know where the grocery store is. I know where the gas station is. I know how to get the things that I need to meet my needs. But when it comes to my mental health needs, there's no counseling store to just walk into or therapy store. So what should I be looking for? You know, when you're shopping for a puppy and they're like, look for these things, make sure you meet the parents of the puppy so it's not a puppy mill, all these things. What should I be looking for then when I'm going to therapy? Because this can be overwhelming.
Okay, so I think a good starting point would be we have to back it up just a little bit to talk about the word therapist. We're using the word therapist a lot, and that encompasses a lot of different people.
Right.
And so in this particular context, we're referring to mental health therapists as opposed to other kinds of therapists.
Like a massage therapist.
However, mental health therapist, like a massage
there's
therapist.
Lots, yeah.
There's a lot of different kinds of therapists. So I know we're saying the word therapy a lot, and the professional term therapist, it isn't actually like what we would call a regulated term. So for example, you, Karen, have a lot of experience in mental health. Your educational history and work history has been in mental health field.
Yeah.
And you could then tomorrow decide, oh yeah, I'm going to be a mental health therapist. I'm going to open a practice and this is what I'm going to do.
I should, to be honest. I'd be good at it.
I'm going to advise against it.
Can I get an honorary degree for that?
No.
I don't think it works like that.
So the important distinction here is around that language. Like, we'll say therapist, but really Meg and I are called two different things. So I'm a registered provisional psychologist, and I'm registered with one regulatory body called the College of Alberta Psychologists. Meg is a certified Canadian counselor, and she is registered with the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association, the CCPA. I know.
But you guys went to school for the same thing.
We went to school together. Yeah. So we have the same educational background when it comes to our masters. However, we have some differences in the way that my undergrad background is in psychology, Meg is in teaching. We have different work experiences. So different therapists end up where they are in their career in different ways, right? Kind of variety of different things. So I guess the one thing I want to highlight here then is to say you should know what your therapist is called, what their professional title is. And then it's maybe as simple as Googling that or looking that up or talking to them about what does that mean? Who are you registered with? How did you get your license? Because I think an important part when we're selecting a therapist to work with is that we make sure that it's somebody with credentials that is competent and trained to do what they need to do to support us with the issue that we have. And that means that they're connected to a regulatory body.
Does that mean that they'll be more expensive?
It can mean that, actually. It can mean that because being a part of the regulatory bodies that we're with, there is a recommended, what we call a recommended fee schedule. So how much we charge is actually kind of set by our regulatory bodies. There's some variety there, which I'm not going to get into, but in terms of other people, like maybe if you meet somebody who it seems to be really cheap, for example, for therapy. And not to be throwing too much shade here on other professionals, because there's different ways to work with mental health.
That's right.
But there are, titles like a coach, like a life coach or a love coach or whatever. So they might be charging a lower rate and they might be working in a particular area and call themselves a coach. And it's really important to find out, what does that mean? What did you train in? Is anybody overseeing what you do? Because Meg and I both have had to go through a licensing process to obtain our license, which means that we're held to a certain standard in terms of ethical practice, in terms of the standard of practice of the service we provide.
Right.
So it is really important that when you're looking for somebody, you really find out what is their title, who are they registered with? They should be registered with somebody. And then you can look them up on that website. Like you could go to College of Alberta Psychologists and look my name up and you can see that I'm currently licensed and this is when my license expires. This is what this means. It is really important that we're educated about that. It's not as simple as walking into a doctor's office and assuming, oh yeah, this person's an MD.
Yes.
They'll be able to do certain things.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, even that, if you're getting something that's a specialized service, if you need to go in for surgery or you need to do something different, you're going to have to look for the kind of doctor that is the right doctor for that issue.
That's right.
Like, I'm not going to go to my family doctor if I'm having serious issues with my skin. They're going to send me to a dermatologist.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's really, again, figuring out, what does this mean? What's your title? What does this mean in terms of your credentials and your competency? Can you help me with the thing that I'm dealing with? And what do you know about that?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I think that's really helpful.
This can be confusing, right? So it's really important to say, I think for Canada in general, every province has its own regulatory bodies when it comes to mental health. Yeah. They have their own rules. There's some that are at a federal level, but mostly it's regulated by provinces themselves. Right. So there's different rules of, for example, to be a psychologist in BC, you have to actually complete your doctorate. You have to have a PhD to have that title. Whereas in Alberta, you can be a registered psychologist with a master's level education, but you've had to do some other work maybe to meet those requirements. And so it does vary across provinces. And again, it's just important that wherever people are, even in states, I know you have some listeners in the states, every state, every province and territory, they have their own regulations around this. Yeah. And it's important to know, what is this person's title and what do they do?
Right. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, because we've said a couple of times now that Nev and I went through the same program. We had the same master's level education. Right. But then she's really passionate about family counseling and has experience in that, whereas I have not ever done any family counseling because we also get to choose what we want to specialize in. And part of being in these regulatory bodies is that we have to have a certain amount of extra education each year as well. Okay. Kind of like teachers do professional development. Right. It is professional development, right? But then that's another thing you can ask a counselor or look up, whether do they have extra training in grief and loss, for example, or do they have extra training in family counseling or play therapy or any of these different things that we're talking about. It is very confusing. Yeah. It can be hard to know which questions to ask. Yeah. But if you can be as specific as, what's your designation, like your title, where did you go to school, what was it for, and what do you specialize in? Like, what are you particularly good at?
Right. So if I'm not very internet savvy, and I know many therapists, including yourselves today, have talked about going on Psychology Today. You can look up credentials and look for people, all sorts of things. But that can also be overwhelming because just to sit there and do that is a lot. Some people, we're a quick fix. We need something quick. So where else could I get that information? Like, who else could I ask if I don't want to go online? Are there people like that I could ask? Like, do you know any good therapists? Or
there's lots of different options. I mean, lots of people are immediately going to think friends and family, but as we were saying earlier, you might not be comfortable asking people in your life for that kind of advice, or for even to let them know that you're thinking about getting this kind of support for whatever reason. Back to that stigma again. Yeah. So there's other people. Some doctors will be able to either provide suggestions or even referrals. Right. Your pharmacist could be a good person to ask. I mean, they already know what kind of medication you're on, so that's a really good it's probably point. Not so hard to ask if they know of any mental health supports.
I've never thought of that. No. And you have such a good point. They have all my medical history. And I wouldn't even think to ask that. Thank you for that. That's good. Okay. Your pharmacist, that's a good place to go.
Yeah. They might not know, but a lot of them do. They get that question a lot. They can often have at least point you in the right direction. Right. We were talking earlier, like maybe your nail tech or your hairstylist. They know people. They talk to people.
Do. They have a lot of clients.
They're kind of like therapists also.
Yeah. That's I feel like my eyebrow friend, 100%. I'm like, I feel like I just did therapy with you and I got wax. Look at that. I think that would also mean that we'd have to be okay with talking about it too, right? Like we can't have it both ways. And I'm not a therapist, so I can talk like this. But it's true, because it's like where I don't want to go online. I don't want to go to Psychology Today. I don't even want to ask my doctor, because I've known my doctor for 40 years and I don't want to be judged. I don't want to ask we just start to limit ourselves so much. And I was talking to some people before this episode, and I'm like, so like, why don't you go to therapy? I know them well enough to ask them, because they would be in the I like it for you, but not for me category. So I wanted to tap into those people a little bit. Some of the things that they were saying, a few of them mentioned that it's like you start thinking, well, I'll be okay. So that's why we don't start to ask our friends and our family and our hairstylists, because you think, well, I'm low today, but I'll be okay. But I've been low for a couple of days, but then in a couple months, like we're just waiting for it to sort of go away, because it's not a broken arm. It's nothing in my face. I don't like you had mentioned earlier, Nev, about people with something a little more complicated, like schizophrenia, it maybe needed something a little bit more than just talking to our friends. I think we struggle in that area. And so, so some of these folks are saying, well, I don't go because it'll get better. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have a rebuttal to that.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's about, and maybe we'll talk about this too, around, when do we go? When is it time to go to therapy? Because I think it's a common experience what you're describing, that people would say, I've had a bad day, had a bad week, had a bad month. And then at what point do you think that it would be a good time to go to therapy? And I mean, I think Meg and I would probably say any time is good time for therapy, but it really does. Sometimes people wait so long for things to get really, really bad to feel like, okay, now I'm desperate enough that now is the time for therapy. Right. And if that's the place where you decide to access therapy, that's fine. Yes. That's okay. Yeah. But do we need to be in like crisis or kind of that desperate mode that we're like, okay, things are so bad now that now I'm really considering this as an option.
Right.
It doesn't have to be so bad. I think I'd mentioned to you in a conversation last week when I was saying, I think oftentimes couples come into therapy when they've come to a point where it's like, well, either we're going to therapy or we're going to get a divorce.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's fine. Again, if you want to come into therapy at that point, I mean, it's a lot to come in and say, well, you therapist better fix us or we're going to get a divorce. Yeah. So that's a whole other thing. But if you think about it, could you have realized that a few months before that, or maybe a few years before that, there have been challenges that have come up in that relationship that could have been addressed and maybe wouldn't leave you feeling the way that you do now at that point. So I use couples, I use relationships as an example, but really that can be for individual, like how bad does it need to be? And it's really up to each person to decide for themselves where that line is. But I would encourage people to think about, do I need to wait for this to be, worst case scenario? Do I need to hit rock bottom to get help? Or can I do something that's proactive, that's ahead of time, that prepares me for situations? Because counseling can be a good fit for a lot of different issues.
Yeah. Well, we do it for like colds. I don't want this cold to become strep throat, so I'll start with echinacea. I'll have tea. I'll do all these little things to prevent it from getting from worse. At least I can try it. And sometimes you can nip a cold in the bud. Is that how you say it? I don't know. I'm not good at these analogies. Or sometimes it gets out of hand. And then you need to go get some antibiotics. But it's interesting when you talk like this, because I know, Meg, you've mentioned before too, is there's counseling, the correlation with counseling is you're going for problems. So it's like a negative thing. You got to wait until it gets bad because you need someone to resolve your problem. And then I'll throw one more thing at you. If I am going to pay for it, why not wait till it gets really bad too? Then I get my money's worth, get bang for my buck.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, that's a really good point. I'm going to try to use a little bit of that thinking of like preventative that Nev mentioned, in the sense that in the long run, it would probably, if money is the issue, in the long run, it would probably cost you less if you do a little bit of maintenance mental health work, as opposed to wait till it gets really bad and then really have to dig into some stuff. And I do also want to just put in there that that's not always our choice, right? Like sometimes we've got stuff that has been really, really difficult in our lives, going all the way back to our childhood, that maybe we've just come to the spot where like, okay, yes, I have to dig into this. And it may not be crisis at that point, but you have to do the work.
Right.
But back to this preventative idea. Such a good therapist.
As you guys are so good. You got to throw that in there. It's so much understanding, compassion for everyone, right? It's like, I also understand why you choose to keep suffering. Yeah. Like, I have compassion for that. Is what you're saying, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's hard work. It is. It's hard work. We're not always ready to do that kind of work. But even if you're thinking about it, a therapist can help you get to that readiness point as well. So that's another thing you could think about, being like, I know I've got some really intense that I got to get to at some point. I don't think I'm ready for that. But even going to a therapist and saying, at some point I need to do this. I'm not ready, but maybe you can help me get ready, because therapists can do that too.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah.
And then in terms of like that maintenance thing or that preventative stuff, I think part of it is people think, well, if I'm going to go to therapy, I got to go every week.
Yeah.
I think that's a fairly common perception out there. And that gets very expensive.
Right.
Like, let's just be honest, therapy is not cheap. And I could throw up another middle finger to the fact that it costs too much. But there's this, it's totally true that you can go to therapy once a month or once every other week, whether or not cost is prohibitive. Like, even if it's just, I'm going to go once a month because I just want to make sure that I'm staying on top of things, or even every other month. Like, therapists get that you're not necessarily going to be coming every week. And they're open to that. And it's dependent on what you want to accomplish and how quickly you want to accomplish that. You know, like, yes, you can go every week. You can go twice a week if your therapist is open to that. Yeah. But that's not necessary.
Right. Right. I appreciate you saying that, because the folks that I was asking preparing for this episode, that was a big thing that they talked about was, well, okay, so therapists, and even this comedian that I had on made a joke about it's a business. Therapists will meet with you from now till the end of time for money, and so won't necessarily help you work on something. We'll just let you keep coming back. Why do people think that way, I guess?
I would hope not. I mean, I would hope that therapists aren't just making it a million sessions because of money. That's not why we do the work that we do. And I can't speak for the whole industry.
But this is why it's good to check credentials, right? In case there's people out there, I don't know, being frauds or something. But because
it's possible, right? I mean, we know people get taken advantage of in different ways, and I'm sure there's some crappy therapists out there, or people that that can be, or professionals that can actually cause harm by not doing the things that they're competent in and practicing, like staying in their lane, right? You got to know how to stay in your lane as a therapist, as a practitioner. So and in terms of cost, like, I would say, it's not the case for most. It's certainly not the case for me in terms of why I do the work that I do, but I do recognize that therapy is a privilege and that it does cost money, and it can be not accessible because of cost. It can be not accessible to certain people. And so then we also consider, there's free services, sliding scale services.
You're not always having to pay for therapy, is what you're saying.
You're not always having to pay for therapy. So there are certainly, and we'll provide some resources for your post so people can find places that they can go to. And I mean, Alberta Health Services, our health organization, our health body, I guess. In Alberta, it, has counseling services. So when we talk about therapy here, yes, we're talking in the context of private practice, but it can be stretched broader into just the general therapy that you could get anywhere. And so there are free services, there are lower cost services, and then the full price services. And you can really work with your therapist to figure out what that means for you, what you can afford, what you can do, what's a realistic schedule. Right. As a side note, I'm going to say there are certain kind of therapies or therapy approaches that are very structured that will tell you when we start, we're going to have 6 sessions or we're going to have 10 sessions. That's it.
Work backwards from there.
Other people have it more open-ended. And I think open-ended doesn't necessarily mean I'm just trying to get all your money for all these sessions. What it means is, like, we're going to set some goals and see how we do, and we make progress over time. And there are people who will see their therapists for years and they might see the same person for years. And,
Yeah, I always tell my clients in the first meeting, I'm like, my job is to work myself out of a job. And that really honestly is my goal, because I'm here to help you. That's what I want to do. If I have clients that want to keep coming, that's great. But I'm not the kind of therapist that's going to be like, okay, let's book you in for next week. I'm going to ask. I'm going to say, are you ready for that? Do you want to wait 2 weeks? Do you want to just figure it out and book when you're ready? Like, just really, I think that's another thing to think about in terms of looking for a therapist is, does your therapist make you feel empowered? Does your therapist make you feel like you're in the driver's seat in terms of the decisions you're making around your therapy? Because I think that's really important. That you get to be in control of that. I think maybe for some people too, they think, if I agree to go to therapy, I'm just going to get suckered in to keep going. Whereas I think, again, not wanting to throw shade on anyone, but really good therapists, they want to help empower you and make you feel like not just make you feel, but actually give you the tools to make the decisions for yourself about your own mental health.
And that you don't have to come back. That there's actually like an end goal or an end point in sight. And maybe towards the end you decide, oh, actually, there's this other thing I want to work on, and now let's do this. And that's okay. But I think the idea is that it's not going to be an endless process. There's a plan that you have around what you're doing and maybe like some ways of how you're going to get there. Because it's a interpersonal process, like I think in that sense, we can't control everything. Like I can't tell you in the first session, this next time we're going to talk about this and we're going to do this work, and next time it's going to be this. No, it's not like that. It's collaborative, like Meg has said, and it's deciding what is most important to focus on at that time for you, because there might be different things that you're struggling with, this week or this month or this year that you would have in the past, or that you will in the future, because we change as people over time.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think an important piece there is, again, like finding the right person, the right therapist for the right thing that you're struggling with at that time that you want help with. And you should know, what is kind of the game plan here? You can ask your therapist, how are we going to get there? Can you share some ideas so that you have a better understanding of their way of working, and maybe what the timeline is going to look like, and with that, what the cost is going to look like too. All of those things we have to consider.
So let me ask you guys, what are some strengths that you looked for when you were shopping for therapists?
That's a good question. Yeah. I don't know even if I would call this a strength necessarily, but I guess it's like the qualities. So I definitely went and looked at the credentials and what the person's background is, and can they help me with the thing that I'm wanting to work on? Is this listed as one of their, issues that they specialize in? But I also know for myself, because I'm a therapist and the way that I think and some of the ways that I operate, I want somebody who can also challenge me, who can call me out, who can be a little bit what we would call directive. Like for me, a directive therapist that's also collaborative is the kind of therapist that I know I need, because I don't want to be sitting there and you just ask me a bunch of questions. And yes, I have to do the work. I understand that from a client perspective. But I also want the therapist to help me highlight and bring into awareness things that I don't know. Right. Because a part of the therapeutic process and the way that I view therapy is that one of the main goals is raising my own self-awareness to understand why I think the way I think, why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, why I'm behaving in this way in this situation and behaving a different way in this other situation. I want to understand those things. And if we don't tune into that and really pay attention, it's really easy to miss it. Totally. And so in working with a therapist who can actually offer some insight and offer some ideas and offer some direction, that can be really valuable. And so that's the kind of therapist that I look for. And not everybody's going to want that. Right. Some people really think, coming in, they're thinking, oh, this person's going to give me a lot of advice. And probably one of the key things that we learned, that Meg and I were learning in our master's program, is you don't give advice as a therapist. That's not your job.
That's a problem. If you're shopping for a therapist and your therapist is giving advice, we might have to go back to credentials or something, because that's not ethical in any way, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Because with advice comes a lot of our own ideas of what we think is best for you. And how would I know that? Yeah. Right?
Because you just said earlier, I'm the expert as a client, right?
If you're the client, you are the expert on your own life. Right. And so a part of that, though, does still mean in finding somebody who maybe can be a little bit directive, is like, can you help me look at this thing in a different way? Yeah. Can you offer some perspective? Can you challenge my thinking? Yeah. Can you help me figure this out of, where does this come from when I feel this way, or when this thought pops up? Right. That's what the therapist is doing, is helping you with that process through questioning, but also through offering some ideas and insight. And the collaboration part comes in when they're checking it out with you. Like when I have an idea, now I'm switching back to my therapy hat. When I have an idea as a therapist about what might be going on for you, I'm going to be very tentative about it. I'm going to ask you, hey, I'm thinking that, this could fit with this other piece that you mentioned in, 2 sessions ago. Right. What do you think about this? Yeah. Does this make sense to you? And if it doesn't make sense to you and you're completely like, no, there's no way that's a thing. Okay, cool. I'll take that and we'll move on, and maybe it pops up again in the future, and maybe that your thinking changes. But ultimately, it's a subjective thing. Yeah. Like if you feel that fits, if it makes sense to you, if it's meaningful to you, then great. That's something that you can take away from it that maybe you didn't realize before, you didn't know. Yeah. It's kind of like you don't know what you don't know. Totally. And in therapy, we're highlighting some of that.
Right. To add to that, I think in terms of, a therapist who offers advice, if that means that they're kind of trying to impose their own values on you. Whereas I see my job as a therapist to help people identify and stay true to their values. That the decisions that they're making and the work that they're doing all aligns with what is important to them, not what's important to me. Yeah. I've had clients where I completely disagree with them. Right. I would not make that choice for myself, or I might even think it's not the best choice for them, but they're doing it they're making those choices or they're doing this because it aligns with their values.
Yeah.
And it's not my job to, again, judge what they're deciding to do or to impose my own values on my client.
But is there a line? Is there a line for you as a therapist? If I'm telling you that my way of handling this problem is to go home and lock my kid up, or maybe poison my husband or something. I always just want to say, like, my husband the other day was editing and he's like, you make us sound like, I'm like, I know, I'm so sorry. I'm like, it's because we're safe with each other. I can use us as examples, but I definitely don't want to poison my husband ever. So, but let's say I did in this scenario, in this universe. So I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm going to go home and harm the situation further. Is there a line like where you'd have to say like, whoa, Karen, let's put the rat poison away, please?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to something like you suggesting that you might put someone else or yourself in danger, then part of our code of ethics is that we are absolutely legally obligated to report that. Okay. And, there's a few of those things, and a good therapist, again, will explain what those are to you and those kinds of things.
Right.
But what Nev was saying earlier too, if it's not something quite so serious, that, I'm seeing as maybe it might be a detrimental thing for my client to do, I might have that tentative approach, like what Nev said, like, well, what if you tried this instead? Or what are you can do something like a cost benefit analysis or whatever of two different options or things like that, where you can help the client make a choice that maybe is better for them because, they don't necessarily know how to do that or what steps to take. And that's our job to help them figure that out.
Yeah. No,
I think safety definitely is a non-negotiable kind of thing. Like safety is definitely one of the lines that we have to uphold. But the other piece is too that, as another human being in the room with my client and just having the privilege of being a part of their village that way, I'm also, I think, comfortable to express concern for my clients, to say it in a way that hopefully they can hear me kind of articulate, it's not from a place of judgment, it's from a place of worry because I care about you. And so it's okay for me if there's a situation happening that maybe isn't a safety concern, but I can see this maybe pattern that this person's engaging in that ultimately isn't really benefiting them, or at least doesn't seem to be benefiting them from my perspective. I can then say, hey, I'm actually worried that when you're doing this thing, like, I'm not sure that I see the benefit or how it's serving you.
I was just going to say, can I ask your question for you? I knew you were going to say, how is this serving you?
I love asking that.
I know you do. I learned that from you. I use that now too. How is this serving me? It's an honest question to ask yourself or have someone ask you, because we engage in relationships and patterns because we think that's a good and right thing, because we have a history with someone. Also, our morals and values are being sort of challenged in a way, and it's all sorts of reasons why we do what we do. And to have someone say, how is being friends with this person that's toxic helpful to you? How is locking your son up in the basement? How will that help?
That one we're not.
That one's
that's
straight.
non-negotiable.
No, you're not even going to ask me that question.
I don't need to ask very much. If you're locking your children in the basement, we got a different focus here.
Yes.
But there's lots of different ways to approach and offer some ideas. Again, it's about offering that insight into somebody's possibly harmful or unhealthy patterns maybe, or unhealthy habits, right?
Yeah.
If somebody's drinking a lot and I'm not necessarily thinking, oh, this person's an alcoholic, but am I concerned about their drinking or the fact that, maybe when they're drinking or what they're choosing to do? And then it's okay for me as a therapist to still bring that up and to say, I'm a little bit worried, or to say, I'm wondering when you choose to do this, what else is going on? Or maybe some other questions that, again, help the client actually reflect on that pattern or on that behavior and think about, do I want to do this? Is this aligned with who I am, who I want to be, what I believe? Again, so it's just that reflection process, because oftentimes we don't look at these things so closely. We do what we do. We go about our day and we behave the way we behave, sometimes more intentional than others. We don't recognize the different habits and rituals and how we slip so easily into different things. Like last week when I found myself saying, oh my God, I sound like my mom right now, right? Like, oh my gosh, she just came out of nowhere. And it's, you don't even think about it until it comes out in some odd way. And you're like, okay, wait a minute. What is this?
You mentioned patterns a few times. So maybe I'll leave that because I feel like you're going to say something, right?
Well, it kind of connects too, but I was just going to say, like, in our society today too, like, we're constantly moving, we're constantly on the go. We've got a phone in our hand. We've got, there's very little time for a lot of us to just stop and reflect on what's going on in our own lives. Right? And so for some people, therapy can just be that space to just pause and look inward for a little while and have somebody on that journey with you.
Yeah. The container, like you said, right?
It's one of those forms of actual real self-care.
Yeah.
Where you're saying, I am worth the time and the money and the effort to put this time aside that's just for me.
And that's the other thing that the folks that I asked a question, and they didn't come out and say this, but I know enough to read between the lines. It's too much work. I don't have the time. For some of them, it was about money, all sorts of things. And I think money is always interesting because it links to prioritizing, right? Like I make an X amount and I decide where it needs to go and where I want it to go. But the underlying thing I think it comes back to is this lack of self-worth that many people, many of us at times have had, where we think, I don't deserve to work on this issue. I don't deserve to make things better.
If we're thinking about priority, we also have to consider, where do we make room for ourselves in our day-to-day, week-to-week, when we're in relationships, when we have kids, when we have other responsibilities. It's really hard to make that time. And it's to Meg's point that, saying it's our time to slow down. It's our time to kind of tune into where we're at and what it is that we need. And therapy really can be so helpful when you're feeling stuck, when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you feel like you want to make a change in your life, but you don't know where to begin or how to go about that, when you just don't feel like yourself or the support that you have around you is not enough. And so if you can't think about all of those things and think I should probably prioritize some self-care in the sense of therapy, then we have other problems to talk about here too, right? Because it's really dismissive to ourselves. And I think it does sometimes come down to self-worth. It's not just about money or time. It's like, how do I create the space where I know I'm going to have to put in work, I'm going to have to be vulnerable, and really be intentional about my healing and kind of working on the goals that I have for myself. Yeah. So I think it is important. I would encourage people to ask themselves, like, at what point would I consider this to be important for me? What is my bottom line in terms of where I'm at with mental health and how I'm feeling?
And maybe, I know this is your point, but maybe when we're answering that, we can invite ourselves to challenge ourselves a little bit about that, because some of our view of mental health is just a little tiny sliver of what it really is and can be for us. So maybe learning a little bit more about, because we didn't even tap into the physical connection to our well-being. You had said earlier, like, where does that stuff go when we're holding on to it? So we didn't even tap into that yet. So there's all sorts of reasons that we can be impacted. So
many. And there's so many things that contribute to our mental health that we might not even be considering. And so again, that just goes back to some of the education around mental health. I know there's a lot of knowledge out there now. I know social media is packed with tips and suggestions, but there's also a lot of misinformation. So it's important that we find somebody who is, again, competent and able to support us in the way that we need and is able to provide the right information and some ideas for the tools that might fit for what you need. And so it is really important process, I think, not only just to prioritize, but ask yourself, like, what do I need help with? And at what point am I willing to seek help for that?
Yeah, I think you made a good point earlier too about social media, and we didn't really get into TikTok, but there's all these platforms now, and you and I had talked about this before where, and you both have mentioned this a few times, so much information through social media comes at us. And so you're watching 17 videos in a span of maybe 60 seconds or something. And a lot of people that are on TikTok, when you go back to credentials, aren't necessarily therapists, but are maybe sharing therapeutic ways to take care of yourselves and all that. And it can be overwhelming when you're looking at mixed messages. One TikToker is saying manage anxiety this way because it worked for them, but then another blog over there is saying try this, that. So I think it can get a little overwhelming, and it goes back to those folks that I was talking to, why people stay away from seeking the help because it's like, well, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
So my question to you then is, where would I start? How do I start? How do I go shopping at the therapy store for a therapist? What do I look for then? You've covered a little bit of it, but maybe you can kind of guide us.
You want to start this?
Sure, I'll start. We've already mentioned, like the types of therapy they offer, what they specialize in, how that matches up with your goals and needs. Things you can think of, really practical things like, where is their office located? Are you able to get there? Is parking an issue? Is there transit access? If you are somebody who has limited mobility, can you get into their space? Availability. If they have availability, I mean, a lot of therapists are booked solid and they might not be able to see you for a couple months. And if you feel like you need to see someone sooner than that, or maybe their therapist schedule doesn't fit with your schedule, like just some really practical things that you might want to think about and consider.
Yeah. Other things I would add is to consider the person that you would want to talk to. So to me, when I was choosing my therapist, I was thinking about, do I want to talk to a man, a woman? Do I want to talk to somebody who is of the same culture as I am? Or can relate to some of my lived experiences, maybe as an immigrant? I think it's important for people to consider, all of the cultural aspects, like gender, race, age, even. I knew for myself, I didn't really want to go see a therapist who was much older than me, because I felt like the way that I would connect the most and relate the most to the person was if they were closer to me in age. I did want them to be older, actually. But again, that's just my personal biases. And I think it's important for people to ask themselves, like, who would I want to talk to? I also know for myself, like, I wouldn't want to talk to somebody from my cultural background, but for other reasons. But somebody might actually really want. I recently had a client reach out and was asking for specifically South Asian therapist, female, this age, this kind of background, this kind of education. And that was really, really specific. And so we had to say, okay, well, there's nobody like this in our practice that would be available for that. But here are some ideas of where you might be able to find someone. And on websites like psychologytoday.com, you can actually narrow down your selection for some of the demographic information. You can look at people's photos. You can look at, sometimes there's brief videos of an introduction. I say even things like hearing their voice. If you're annoyed with my voice, we're probably not going to have a great time together. If you're not really, liking the way that I sound or whatever, we all have little small things that kind of bug us.
Definitely.
And so I think it's important to ask yourself, who do I want to go talk to? Have some ideas about that. And then when you're going out to look for them, narrow it down to just maybe 2 or 3 choices. And once you have your 2 or 3 choices, then you can call those people or video chat. Oftentimes therapists offer free consultations over the phone or over video briefly, like 15, 20 minutes. That's a great thing to use to find out whether that person does fit some of those things that you thought of ahead of time. And then you can also ask them a bunch of questions. Like you can actually ask them about why they do what they do or how they operate, how they work.
What can they ask at their first session? So that's great. That's really helpful. So
So either in the consultation or first session, depending on the situation that fits for you, there's all different things you can ask your therapist. So you can ask things like, what do you specialize in? What are your credentials? All those things we talked about earlier. If you know anything about types of therapy and that is interesting or important to you, you can ask what their therapeutic approach is. If that doesn't mean anything to you, you don't have to ask that question. You can ask them, like, how would you describe yourself as a therapist? Some of the questions you asked us at the beginning of this session, you can ask your therapist and see how they are able to answer that question and know that that aligns with what you're looking for. You can ask things like, how long is this going to be? How often will we meet? You can ask whether they belong to different groups or communities, especially if it's important to you that they do belong to certain ones.
Yeah, like LGBTQ therapists, right? And sometimes people from LGBTQ community only want to go to therapists who can relate to their experience. And that's fair. Or like we said earlier, the person of the same race or faith or religion. If you want somebody who's practicing, and some therapists will be more comfortable to share that than others. But I think it's okay to call and ask and say, this is important to me. I want somebody who shares this. And that's okay to ask for that. And if it's different, then that's fine too. If that's not something that's super important to you.
And I think most therapists, I don't want to speak for everybody, but for us at Curio, if somebody's going to come in and say, I want this, this, and this, and we don't have them, we'll do something like what Nev said, where be like, oh, well, you can look here, here, or here, or we can point you in the right direction, or we can offer you specific referrals, those kinds of things where most therapists and most practices will be more than willing to help you find the right fit, even if they can't offer it.
Yeah.
And so asking those kinds of questions during a consultation or a first session can really help you figure out, and maybe even help you end up finding the right therapist, even if it's not the one you're talking to at that moment. Yeah.
Every single one of the therapists that have come on here have said what you said, and I really appreciate that, because I think that is breaking the stigma and really about client care and less about you.
Yeah.
And that's really appreciated. So it really sounds like just even showing up to any place, even that doesn't have to be where your end game is. That's just your starting point, because that facility, that place should be able to guide you, whether it's in the practice or outside of that office somewhere else, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've had people contact us and, talk about what they're going through, that kind of stuff, and then be like, yeah, but I can't afford it.
Yeah.
And so then I'll be like, okay, well, here's a whole bunch of places that offer sliding scales, or here's a place where you can get like 6 free sessions, and just really making sure for us, I'm just going to speak for you here, Nev. You can contradict me if you want, but it's way more important that people get the support that they need and want than that I be the one to provide it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's just that doesn't, because you also talked earlier that it's a two-way street. So if you're getting the sense that your client isn't really opening or feeling comfortable with you, what are you going to get out of that? You're not going to be able to do the best job possible either. Right?
No,
so why would you just take anyone and everyone too? Like you're right. You guys have to be compatible.
We have to be able to also offer that back, right? Like if maybe the client is saying, oh, I do like you. I do want to work with you. But if you recognize in yourself that there's something there that you're not going to be able to work with, or like, for example, there are some situations where, we're taught to set aside our value system and our beliefs to really be there present for our clients.
Right.
And the fact is, we're still human beings. We do still come with our own belief systems and value systems. And sometimes we might be working with a person who really doesn't fit with the way that we view life or the way that we position ourselves. And it could be really, really difficult.
Yeah.
So an example of that might be somebody who has very strong feelings about LGBTQ people. I don't know. I'm going to group everybody together. I'm not meaning to be, but it's just an example. Or somebody who has really strong feelings about people of different color. Yeah. And so it's like, you're going to come in and be really racist in your sessions and kind of spew hate in different ways. Yeah. And if I don't feel able to challenge that in some ways, because a part of my purpose as a therapist too is to advocate for people in community, in our society, to try to advocate for change. And so if somebody's coming in with really strong feelings about something, strong beliefs about something, and they're kind of spewing hate, I will have a hard time keeping my values and my beliefs in check.
Right.
And then I know that I won't be the most helpful person for them.
Yeah.
And so in recognizing that, I'm not saying you're not worthy of being worked with. You're not worthy of therapy. I'm not saying that. Yeah. You should still be in therapy and get help that you need. I just might not be the person for you for that. Yeah. So, and I don't necessarily need to provide like a super clear reason for that. It's just sometimes you don't fit.
Yeah.
And so it is a two-way street. I think that is a good point. And we're not always going to be, a perfect match right off the bat. Right. So sometimes you might have to shop around and find the person that fits for you and the therapist that feels like they can help you.
Can you ask for the consultation?
Yeah.
Yes. Like, it's maybe not all places would be forthcoming with it. So if I'm shopping for a therapist, I can say, hey, can I get a consultation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or you can ask, like, do you have a free consultation or free phone call that you offer? Or is there a way to get some more information or chat with this person before I commit to the first session and spending X amount of money?
Yeah.
It's okay to say that. That's totally fair. And if they're saying, no, we don't have that, we don't offer that, you have to come into first session and pay money, then that would kind of be a red flag for me, to be honest. Like if there's no flexibility in terms of being willing to talk to the person ahead of time, then you might want to consider a different place that is able to
willing
offer
to
some
do
time.
that.
Because again, it's going to be about finding the right therapist for yourself and for the thing that you're dealing with. So.
Yeah. And can I ask, before you guys go on, as well as someone that's looking for a therapist, would you recommend that if I go and I meet a therapist and I'm having this consultation, and I think I like them, but it's like house shopping. I don't know if this is a house I want to buy. I want to see if there's other houses that are similar in the price range. Would you recommend that I go see other therapists that week in consultation, or would you recommend if I got a good vibe from you, I'd stick with you for a couple more or something before I go do that? Like, what would you say about that?
I think that's a really personal decision.
Okay.
You know, I've had people where I've had consults with and they're like, yeah, I think I want to try this out. They come for the first session and then I never see them again.
Right.
That can happen.
Yeah.
Or I've also had people say, oh, thank you very much. I really thought this was helpful, but I just want to talk to a couple other therapists first and before I make my decision.
Right.
And then they might come back, they might not. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a personality thing. Like if you're the kind of person that prefers to have a variety of options, or maybe you're just the kind of person that's like, yeah, I got a good vibe. This feels right.
Right.
I'm good. I can jump in.
Yeah.
And also I just want to remind people too that you can quit therapy at any time.
Like, so you don't, there's 6 sessions, I don't have to suffer through the 6 sessions, or maybe it's not suffering, maybe I feel like I achieved my goal by session 3.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you might quote unquote commit to a therapist, and what if you feel like you achieved your goal, or maybe it works for a few sessions and then something happens and you're like, nope, this is not the right therapist for me.
Right.
You don't owe any explanation. It's you. Therapy is for you.
Yeah.
It's your money. It's your time. You get to decide. So I think maybe that might be helpful even for one person out there where it's, just because you say yes to a therapist doesn't mean you're stuck with them.
Right. Yeah. That's a really good point. I appreciate that. Anything else that we should consider when we're searching for a therapist?
I think I want to go back to our earlier talk about, you know, the kind of place that you need to be in to access therapy. Like I think I had already said, people are often feeling stuck or feeling like they're struggling in some area of their life, and that's when they'll come. But there's also times where we can prepare for like maybe upcoming challenges or transitions. For example, if we know like, okay, we're getting a divorce, our family and our kids might need some support around this. Let's talk about it together in therapy. Or we know that a close family member of ours is really ill and they're going to pass away because they have a terminal illness. Right. I think, I don't know, Meg, if you mentioned like anticipatory grief, right?
Like or like a milestone, like an anniversary coming up of
something,
a loved one's loss, or something that might be difficult to process.
Or maybe sorry.
I love it. I love that. I love when guests talk over each other. It's like we have so much to say.
So much to say.
We always do.
Maybe you're planning a move. Maybe you are going to be moving to a different city or a different country or whatever, and you want to prepare for that. Maybe you're going to start a new job. There's all kinds of transitions that we go through. They don't have to necessarily be really heavy, but therapy can just help us navigate those transitions too.
Yeah. Or it can be really simple too. I think sometimes, again, people think I need to have this big serious problem to go to therapy.
Yeah.
Maybe you're noticing that your road rage is getting pretty bad. If you're on the road, you're driving, and you're constantly getting angry in the car in a way that's really not okay.
Right.
You might want to look at that. Like, why do I get so angry? So some people will come to therapy just simply to learn about emotions, to learn about how to tolerate their emotions, how to work with them and manage them, right? It doesn't need to be some very serious, awful thing that's happening in your life.
Like that ultimatum, divorce or therapy.
Or this, right. It could be that you're just, I'm feeling really sad, or get angry about stuff that doesn't make sense to me, or I want to be better at X, Y, and Z, and I want to work on personal growth and developing my skills in this way around, you know, emotional intelligence or how I communicate with people. I want to get more comfortable in public speaking situations. I want to be able to stand in front of a boardroom. I had somebody share with me a while back, being an only woman in a room full of men and speaking in a meeting. Yeah. What's that like, right? And it's just figuring out ways that we can express ourselves and get the support that we need with all these different things that might be coming up for us. And so I don't think there's any issue too small or too big that could be tackled in counseling.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I like how you put that. And it almost sounds like sometimes we can anticipate a bump in the road coming. We see the sign, you know, sometimes the city's really good and they'll put the signs out that say, oh, there's a bump coming. And you're like, oh, I got to prepare for it. And sometimes we don't realize until we've gone over the bump and we've got a flat tire or something. And then there's these whatever in between. So I like what you're saying is we can anticipate something coming and prepare for it. Or we're ready to seek ways to fine tune a skill,
Mm-hmm.
getting better at my job, you know? Yeah. I think that's a lovely way of putting it, because I don't think we always think of those things, those little skills that we can get better at, and they're probably connected to something else.
Right.
However, we don't have to go there. We don't have to control that right away.
It can be so like people think, right? Oh, I'm trying to progress in my job, but I'm getting stuck. I can't get that promotion.
So you're saying not everything's about your childhood. Is what you're saying. Okay? I think that's
maybe
good.
it is, but probably not.
But usually it is, but not always, is what you're saying. And I think that's a relief for listeners, because that's all I ever talk about is we're connected to our childhood. But you're right. Not everything is always connected to.
And we also don't always have to go there, right? I think some people think, oh my God, if I go to therapy, I'm going to have to talk about all the horrible things that have happened to me and how hard my life was maybe as a child or as a teen or whatever.
Really good point.
We don't have to go there. That's not what therapy needs to be. Again, you get a voice in what is talked about and what is focused on and what you think you might need some help and support with, what you want to process. It could be that, like I said, you might want to, wonder about why can't I get that promotion? And then you can go back and look at some of the skills in the way you're interacting with people, or what you need to kind of maybe work on to be able to get there, to be able to do that.
Or just to process the disappointment or the whatever you feel, the embarrassment you feel about not getting the promotion. Sometimes we don't even know how to handle those kinds of emotions, right?
Good point. We put in that dark, deep basement of, in our belly and lock it up with the other things. And I think that's a really good point, because when you just look at that in isolation, I didn't get a job. It's natural to feel upset about it. It's disappointing, all those things. But when you step away from them, the big picture, it's not the end of the world. Hopefully I can get another job. However, when I tuck it in to all the other things I've been putting down in that deep cave, one of those is going to eventually pop up. And now it is about my childhood and all those things. Right? So I also hear you guys saying, deal as we go. It's okay to manage things as we go.
Yeah.
That back to the car maintenance or analogy, right? Just take care of things as they happen, and it doesn't have to be very painful.
Yeah. I mean, you do physical checkups with your doctor, which are preventative and looking ahead. We don't only go to the doctor when we're really sick. We also go to our doctor to just get a checkup and see how things are going. Or if we're using the car analogy, we go for oil changes and we go for regular maintenance. We don't need to have our car broken down and towed into the service to have something addressed. So same with therapy. It could be that, maybe you are in that crisis phase and you really are I really need help now. But it could also be that you're just going in for a little checkup. You're like, hey, let me see what's going on with this. This has been coming up a bunch, Let me check this out.
Now, if only mental health checkups were covered by healthcare.
Right?
Yes.
You could do mental health oil change, where you could just walk into a little garage. You guys, I think last one I thought of a children's book. This one, a new mental health shop. In the body shop, but it's the brain shop.
The brain shop.
Right?
I like it.
And we go in there and it looks like the body shop, and we're getting all sorts of care maintained. I don't know. We'll come back to it. I think
fine-tuning emotions and thoughts and body experiences.
Let me know if you need a receptionist or an admin person, because I would love to help out.
Excellent.
Yeah, let me know if you need that. So the last point that I was talking to the folks I was asking about therapy, why people don't go and that sort of thing, and they had covered about too much work, the stigma, the cost. The last thing that one of them had said was, and do you direct bill? And then they burst into laughing. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? And they're like, well, it's such a stupid thing, but it's enough of a reason to not show up, because again, the paperwork behind it. And if I have insurance that covers it, but I don't have the money up front, that might be big enough reason. And then, people just don't always call or look online about places, and not everywhere advertises that they direct bill. So I think that might be a question that people can ask when they, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, so. Another important question to ask is to make sure that your therapist or that your insurance company will cover your therapist. Sometimes they won't, sometimes if it's a provisional or sometimes if it's a counselor, there's different rules for different insurance companies about who they'll cover.
To that title, right?
Yeah, it goes back to the title, and don't want to get really into it, but the system in Alberta is in such a way right now that there are lots of really qualified individuals that insurance won't cover for a variety of reasons. So you also want to make sure that your insurance will cover the person you've decided you want to see. And if they direct bill, if that's important to you, and also how much money your insurance will cover, like how many sessions will that cover, depending on how much your therapist costs and all those kinds of things as well.
And just to add to that, I just want to kind of do a little shout out to, employment assistance plan, EAPs that exist in the workplace too. So for somebody who is concerned about cost or access, they might be able to get, if they have benefits through their work, they might be able to access a therapist through one of those plans. And so that's another piece where that's another service that's available and can save you a bit of money if that's something you're worried about.
And for a lot of companies, it's done in a way that is very private. So, if I worked for a company and I went and sought out employee assistance programs, I'll be counseling, it doesn't come back to billing as Kieran McKay Access Counseling. I come up as a number so that HR and payroll and all those folks don't really know who's accessing it, but they just have numbers that, 76 employees accessed EAP, great. So I think that sometimes that's good to point out too, because sometimes, again, that stigma, like I don't need my workplace finding out that I'm going cray-cray over something, even though it's such a good thing. Hopefully workplaces are appreciating that folks are seeking mental health supports, right? But we don't all feel that way. So I think it's good that you brought that up, and it's a nice reminder of it can be done in a private way. And HR is, if your company has an HR department, HR's expectation is to be private.
If you are choosing to use a therapist through your employer, I do think that it's important, again, to ask that therapist, is there information that you're going to have to share with my employer? Yeah. Are there any reports that are going to be going at the end of our time together or during our time together? Yeah. And again, you have the right as the client to ask any questions about this that you want. And you have a right to your privacy and for information to be, maintained confidential. And so find out, ask about it. Yeah. Don't hesitate. Don't assume that things are, kept this way or that way. If you're going through your workplace, I would say it is important to ask what is shared, who will know, how much will they know, and then you have a clear idea before you go in, okay, this is what I can expect. Right. And these are things that I want to talk about, and maybe these are things I don't feel comfortable, or whatever it is. Yeah. But just be informed, right? That's an important part of it.
And a lot of insurance companies, the same thing. You might want to just double check with your insurance company what they will require from the therapist. Yeah. Any good ethical therapist won't share any details. It'll just be broad strokes, but if even that concerns you, which it absolutely has every right to, then you want to know that going in for sure. Yeah.
Huh. Nice. Okay, so homework time, call to action time. Is there anything that you can leave listeners with, something they can think about, or something that maybe they can go and do?
I think I just want to loop back to the idea, and I know we've said it a million times today, it's about finding the right person. And I really want that to stick with people, because if you think about counseling or therapy or psychotherapy, whatever you want to call it, at the core of it, at the heart of therapy is the interpersonal relationship, the connection to another human being. We know in research, different kind of therapy approaches and theories have different evidence behind it, and those are important in therapy. But we've seen repeatedly demonstrated in research and across these theories that there are some commonalities. And one of the most important pieces, if not the most important piece, is the therapist-client relationship. That is a really important determinant of successful therapy, or how successful therapy is going to be. Your relationship is really, really important. And so I really want people to consider finding the right person, so that not only will it be hopefully successful and effective for you, but you really feel that you can have a good connection with another human who's there to support you, to validate you, to hold space for you, to support you in your healing. That's just what it is. Find the right person.
Yeah. Really well said. I appreciate that. Anything, Meg, that you'd like to add to that?
That was
if
great.
If you could, right? I know, I hear you.
I mean, I'll just come back to kind of what I was going to say, was that idea of just encouraging listeners to be curious about themselves, about the process of therapy. And that connects to what Nev was saying, be curious about the therapist and about how you interact with them. because I agree with her 100%. That relationship is absolutely the most important thing. And that's why I know I'm not the right therapist for everybody, but hopefully I am for some. And I'm sure Nev feels the same way. Yeah. Find the right therapist for you. Don't be afraid to say goodbye to a therapist that isn't working for you. And just trust your gut on that too. I think sometimes we don't always give a lot of credence to how we feel in our guts and just our intuition about things, but that's really important.
No, I agree. And I think it's very kind for you to say that. And I'll say it as a non-therapist. There's also something to do with me if I'm struggling to build a relationship with a therapist too. Like, it's not all on the therapist. So when I say, oh, wow, I didn't go back because that therapist sucked, maybe, but also like, what doors was I closing before I even got there? What kind of mindset was I in when I got there? And how did I actually want it to go? Did I not want it to go well? So sometimes I think we have to also like put some responsibility back on us as individuals and not give so much power and credit in some ways to therapists. It's lovely to have you along the way, but you're not going to be the reason why I'm going to feel better the next day. Yeah. I know with that counselor when I was 14, he was not the reason why. It was the space that he invited me in, and I went willingly. I could have left there and said, oh, I don't want to talk to you ever again, but he did it in a way that allowed me to want to go in there. And, it was a combined effort. So I want to thank you both at this point for coming on, letting me pick your brain. I think therapists have a fight against stigma, and you guys did such a nice job in how you shared ways that we can be curious and ways that we can explore what therapy can mean for us. And you did it in a way that, thank you for not being defensive, because I know a few times I was like, well, people think this. So, but I want to also ask you if you can help me connect folks should they be interested in coming over to your practice. So tell us again about Curio Counselling, and also tell us where people can reach you and how they can reach you if they're interested.
Okay, thanks for that option. Yeah, so we're Curio Counselling. You can check us out on the web at curiocounselling.ca, counseling with 2 L's because we are in Canada. And information is there. Our phone number is 403-243-0303. And you can also email us at info@curiocounselling.ca. But again, all that stuff is on our website as well, which I'm assuming will be linked on the show notes.
You bet.
Awesome.
Absolutely will be linked.
A lot of what we covered today, actually, Meg and I have been collaborating and writing a blog post as well about outlining some of these questions and things to consider when you're choosing a therapist and whether therapy is right for you and whether it's the right time. There's going to be a blog post on our website as well, curiocounselling.ca. So you can read about this, and it's going to probably have some overlapping information there that you can go back to remind yourself, to refresh if you're curious about how to find a therapist.
That's awesome. I love that you guys are doing the blog. I love that you guys are also talking about group sessions coming up. That's really innovative and new. And then good old fashioned different ways of finding therapists in the office. So lots of resources coming out of Curio Counselling.
Yeah, we're really trying to tap into like what's missing. I think there's some areas where we can do better in our city, but also in general. So it's just nice to tackle some of those things. And we're finding a lot of people are asking about where do I even start? Like we did today. Yeah. And so we thought that writing up a little blog about that could be useful. We're hoping it'll be helpful for people.
Yeah, I love it. And if people aren't sure, again, you've talked about you give them your phone number, your website. They can literally just call you and you will give them a phone session on how and where to start.
Absolutely.
Right?
And again, like I said earlier, if we can help you, we'll help you find what you need.
Exactly. Good. Yeah. Apart from that, I want to thank you both again. I also want to thank our listeners today. Just a reminder that these conversations are door openers. So let us know what you're thinking, if this is a topic that you enjoyed, or if you want to know a little bit more about it, or maybe even a little bit more about our guest today. Reach out to me at info@mfupodcast.com or on Instagram at mfupodcast. Otherwise, thank you to both of you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you so much. This was awesome.
My pleasure.